Welcome to the Law, Your Money, and You. Welcome, everyone, no matter where you are. I'm Roberta Sapphire, an attorney in Sharon, Massachusetts, New England, with my co-host,
Camille Barron, a healthcare advisor and financial coordinator, also in Sharon, Massachusetts, New England, United States of America, in the world. We have one of our favorite guests here with us today. She's returning for the umpteenth time. I can't even count. And every time she comes here, she has more of a wealth of information for us. And we're going to have talking with her a little bit about the coronavirus and how it affects employment.
Yeah, she's an absolute genius, Emily Smith Lee, and she's been around a long time. And she's just super brilliant. And no matter how many times, anything you ask her, she can tell you she knows what she's talking about. Attorney Emily Smith Lee. And the Smith was her maiden name, right? My mother's maiden name was Smith, but that's another story. Anyway, you got a lot to tell us about this coronavirus. And what do you want her to start off with, Camille? There's so much, the relief legislation. How about that? And employment.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this with some of our other guests, but we never really did a deep dive into it because no one has the employment expertise that Emily does.
Yeah, employment law issues.
Yeah, and because right now, the place that we're at right now, we have businesses starting to open in different places throughout the country. And some people may not feel safe yet going back to work. So there's a whole set of ramifications that affect employment. And that's why we're so happy to have you here today, Emily. What can you tell us about some of the things you're aware of or you confronted?
Somebody's sending questions.
It's great to see you both again. Yeah, I mean, there's some new rules that are kind of game changers in the employment world. And there are some things that our laws just aren't really that clear about how they handle. Camille, you mentioned people starting to reopen, going back to work. How do you address the employee who may be immunocompromised or may be high risk and may not feel safe going back to work? But there's a lot of things that employers also need to be aware of in terms of what happens when people get sick or if somebody has to stay home to take care of somebody who's got the virus.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the relief packages come in.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that is kind of a game changer is a lot of small businesses have gone merrily along knowing that the Family Medical Leave Act doesn't apply to them because in ordinary times, it's only people with 50 or more employees.
Mm-hmm.
Under the COVID Relief Act, there is FMLA available to anybody with fewer than 500 employees, which is almost everybody that you know and do business with.
Mm-hmm.
They have to have at least one employee. Can they have 1099?
Well, that's
contractors.
That's another wrinkle. I mean, the law relates to employees. The sick time and the leave, I don't know if they per se apply to independent contractors, but as we've talked about before in Massachusetts, most people who are treated as independent contractors actually should be employees.
Oh, yeah, we said that before.
Yeah.
That's another thing.
So that's game changer number one is most small businesses just aren't used to trying to work around job protected leave that could be up to 12 weeks. In the case of COVID, you don't necessarily have to be sick yourself. It can apply if you've got a family member who's sick, if you're under quarantine, a whole list of COVID-related reasons that you need extended time off of work. The other game changer is FMLA leave never used to be paid leave.
Never what?
Paid. It never used to be paid. You could, if you wanted to, pay somebody for leave. Under the COVID relief legislation, you have to pay 2/3 of your employee's regular salary for that leave. Up to a cap of, I think it's $10,000.
So the federal government pays that to the employer?
No.
The
employer pays that to the employee who's on leave.
Where does the employer get it from if he's out of business or if he has no income?
Good question. It's a real risk for business owners. when they're making decisions about whether to cut back on staff or not cut back on staff. Because if you've got an employee who needs to take advantage of that leave, you also can't retaliate against them for doing that. So once you have people who get sick or affected, excuse me, this is my coworker, Wilbur.
Wilbur, hi Wilbur.
And apparently somebody has the effrontery to be walking past our house. Yeah, I mean, the amounts the employer is liable for is capped, but it's still a significant expense for a lot of business owners.
Right. And they have the, do they, in theory at least, do they have the Paycheck Protection Program to rely on for the source of those funds, Emily? The PPP?
Sorry.
Are the,
No problem at all.
are the employers able to, or is it intended that the employer would use those PPP funds, those who have it available to them, to fund the employee payment?
Yes, I think that's absolutely the intent. You know, as folks know, the payroll protection program has not exactly gone smoothly for small businesses. You know, the first round of funding ran out in a New York minute. A lot of it went to much larger companies. The second round, I think, is going a little bit better, but you know, what people need to understand is that the forgiveness of those loans is only for 8 weeks.
Yes.
You know, and we're already more than 8 weeks into this, you know.
Oh yeah, and then they didn't get the money right away, some of them.
Right, right. So, you know, when we talk to a lot of our clients are making those difficult decisions for small businesses because, you know, do you take that money and hope for the best, or if you really don't think that you can maintain for more than 8 weeks, do you go ahead and do the furloughs and the layoffs, you know, before you incur all of that obligation, which is the other game changer that I think people need to think about. The unemployment laws have changed radically for COVID, including the federal money that adds $600 a week to everybody's unemployment benefit.
They get an extra 600 a week or a one-time 600.
Oh, an extra 600 a week
I didn't get it.
on the weekly benefits. So there are people.
Every week?
Yep.
So every week you get an extra $600. What if you didn't make that to begin with? You really, that's why a lot of people you hear would rather keep staying on unemployment than making more than when they worked. They don't want to go back to work.
For some people, that will be true. I mean, remember though that if you lay off somebody and they go on unemployment and the economy reopens and you have work for them again, it's not up to them to stay on unemployment forever. If there's work available for them to do and they choose not to take it, they can lose their right to those benefits.
Yeah. Just like in any unemployment claim, right? If you have the opportunity to go back to work, they're not just going to keep paying you unemployment benefits.
That's right. You know, and I think the intent was to try to make people close to whole. You know, regular unemployment is only 50% of their salary. So, you know, with a lot of people, you know, laid off or furloughed because of COVID, I think that benefit is supposed to try to keep them from taking that big hit, because in ordinary times, to your point, Roberta, you want people to be looking for work. You want it to be more appealing to them to be working than to be on unemployment. I think this is in recognition of the fact that there's just not jobs to find until this is over. But it does, you know, there are people who are making more money on unemployment than they did at their jobs if their weekly benefit.
Well, have you seen where the supermarkets have signs, help wanted? The Chinese restaurants and doing takeout businesses. The what other places? The hardware stores, the Home Depots. Now you have Target, who also sells food, but they also sell what they call non-essentials. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, hopefully they open back up the states. Like when we do functions, if you can't do a function with a certain number of people, you're gone, you know. And that's true not just of functions, but of anything, whether it's a restaurant or a clothing store. You have you have these malls, strip malls, that are stores of 9 or 10 stores. So now you create, it's like a chain reaction. They can't pay their rent.
Yep.
Interesting. What do we think?
Emily, suppose someone has the opportunity to return to work. Let's say that the business opens up, but the employee does not feel safe. Is the employee still eligible for unemployment at that point?
So it depends. It depends on sort of the reasonableness of that concern.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you've got a health condition or you've got an immunocompromised person in your family and you have a reasonable concern about exposure in the workplace, you can, under the COVID unemployment rules, continue to collect.
Mm-hmm.
How is that going to be determined? Who knows?
You must have to file affidavits, and wasn't there a case there where they went out and inspected and they found 2 people that there was no such business they put in for unemployment? There was,
I didn't see that recently or in the past.
recently, just a day ago. One of them was in Andover, Mass, and the other one was in Rhode Island. And one fellow said it said that they opened up a claim and said in its brother's name, this or that, and it wasn't so. And then the other restaurant didn't exist. It didn't even exist, and they're both in federal court or somewhere, wherever they are now. But that they actually went out there and looked.
Mm-hmm.
If they ever went to your house, Emily, how many dogs do they have to get by?
2.
Oh, there you go. Just tell them one and then let the other. But Emily is.
No, there's definitely 2 of them and a cat. Yeah, so I don't know about that particular case, but it's the other reason that's going to be an issue is the big sea change is, for the first time, self-employed people and independent contractors are eligible for a different flavor of unemployment called the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance.
Interesting.
So in normal times, if you get laid off from a job, the very first thing that the DUA is going to do is they're going to look up your employer and they're going to look up their tax ID number, and they're going to check the box and say, yes, these people have been paying into unemployment. There's a flood of people now filing either as their own businesses or as independent contractors for somebody who's never had payroll. They're eligible under the COVID-19, the pandemic unemployment, but the state's going to have no record. The state's not going to have that database to check it off against. So, yeah, I mean, it's a big deal to the good for people who do not have regular W-2 wages but are affected. But to your point, Roberta, I'm sure it's going to open up a lot of chaos.
How do they collect if there's no records?
Right, they're going to have to submit their own documentation of the income that they lost.
Yeah. And are those people working now? Are they in an office where they can check? I mean, most of them. I mean, you called today and they said, "Well, hit extension such and such, and then you hit extension such and such, and then it goes round and round and round. And you never get to talk to anyone."
Yeah, I don't know how they're staffing. You know, whether everybody's remote or some people are there. It's definitely. I mean, you see the numbers in the news. They're just overwhelmed with applications. We've heard from a lot of people who are just, you know, perfectly clearly eligible for unemployment. It's just taking a while.
Yeah.
And, you know.
How are the states, I wonder how the states are doing that have, quote, opened up. Or they haven't opened up that much.
The earliest one, I believe, is Georgia, and that's really just since late last week. So it's probably too soon to tell.
Fascinating. But this employment thing that you're talking about, when you say employee safety concerns, can they just pull up anything? Or?
You mean to continue to collect unemployment?
Yeah, or whatever.
You know, it remains to be seen how they're going to determine what is reasonable concern. You know, there's different levels of risk in different jobs, and different people have different vulnerabilities. But this is another huge unknown outside of the unemployment. if you've got, and we've had some calls from people in this situation. They have employers who are not essential businesses, but are still operating and requiring their employees to turn up to work and threatening termination if they don't report to work. In ordinary times, that wouldn't be against the law. An employer would have a right to make an unreasonable request, and an employee would have the right to say, no, thank you, I don't want this job anymore. But, question whether if you're being asked to come in to report to a job that is subject to the non-essential business closure order, whether that's unlawful from an employment perspective.
And also, Emily, in the past week or so after the Georgia and then other states have opened up, I think I was reading or hearing on the news that there's an interest in limiting the liability of employers if an employee does return to work and then becomes infected. Have you heard that? And what's the implications of that?
I have heard that. I think the implications are a little different from state to state. Like there are, generally speaking, in Massachusetts, a workplace injury, your exclusive recovery is through the Workers' Compensation Act.
Yep.
Historically, again, there have been some limitations on whether you could claim an infectious disease was a workplace exposure. And there's a practical difficulty of proving that. You go through life, you go to your job, you go to the store, where did you catch it? So for the most part, my feeling is employers in Massachusetts are already pretty protected by the workers' compensation statute. There are other states that have, harsher consequences for employers' workplace exposure. Traditionally, to be considered a workplace exposure for an infectious disease, you would have to be in a job that kind of particularly exposed you to that, like a healthcare worker, an EMT, a first responder. But I don't know. We've seen Walmart, they had 80 people in one store test positive and they had to close the store. At some point.
You know anything about where well, in Massachusetts, I don't know if it passed already, but they were trying to get something through where the insurance companies would have to cover a COVID loss, which it now doesn't, and that Massachusetts would repay the insurance companies. Have you heard about that?
I last time I looked for an update on that was about a week ago, so I don't know for sure if it passed. I know it's controversial, and I know it's controversial even among small businesses who might stand to gain from that, because on the one hand, you would get immediate relief for your, business interruption. That's what it is.
I was just going to ask, is that what you mean, business interruption?
To take a step back, there's a lot of business owners have insurance coverage that does cover business interruption. So your roof caves in and you can't use your building for a month. You get some funds for that. Most of these policies have exclusions for infectious disease.
Besides exclusions, 2 pages of exclusions. We've talked to several insurance companies and agencies over the past 2 weeks, and what happens is, first of all, they're saying, well, you need damage to the building, and if there's anything, and then they go, well, you have to file a claim, and then they go, well, the claim's denied, but then what's they think might happen is, under this law you mentioned, if it passes, they'll have to pay and adjust the policy. But it's interesting. Will Massachusetts reimburse the insurance companies? I wonder if we'll have, in California, there's a few class action suits against insurance companies.
Yeah, there are, and those, as I understand it, sort of revolve around the language of the policies and what that means. Like, is COVID-19 a force majeure?
Yeah. Well, insurance companies don't want to pay. But can you go over to the force majeure, what that would mean? I know it is, but I don't know if our viewers do.
Sure. The force majeure is a fancy word in another language that covers things that you would consider an act of God. Earthquake.
French.
Yes, is it French? And it exists in various kinds of contracts, insurance included, typically to say, if I can't live up to my end of the deal because of an act of God or one of these terrible things, then I'm not responsible for it. Again, whether that covers infectious disease, we've not really had a moment in history where a virus has had such a significant effect on everybody. So I suspect we're going to see, I'm not deep in the weeds, Roberta, on those lawsuits. I just sort of hear about them like everybody else.
Interesting, though.
Quickly on the insurance, the thing that I understand to be a little bit controversial about that bill is if the insurance companies don't get reimbursed for that, it's going to end up in everybody's rates.
How long is that unemployment $600 a week good for?
July 31st for now.
Oh, okay.
Unemployment benefits run for, is it 26 weeks maximum?
Traditionally 26 weeks. There's now, so they did this, the federal government did a version of this back in the 2008, 9, 10 recession, where they added another 13 weeks federally funded. So people can get up to 39 weeks of unemployment. The extra $600 a week is good through, I believe it's July 31st.
That's amazing. That's a lot of money.
You know what I'm hearing as you two speak, is because you're both attorneys, the ambiguities in this law so far, the PPP Act, and the flaws actually, is it true then that a lot of these things would be resolved in case law because they're not written into the law and they're not clear?
I mean, it's the Department of Labor, I think, acted pretty quickly to issue some guidance on the initial, what they call the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act. That was the bill that has the emergency FMLA and the paid federal sick time. They jumped in pretty quickly to define a lot of the terms in that. So,
but the courts are pretty well closed now too. Hey, why don't you talk too about this new law in Massachusetts that a lot of people might be interested in, the remote notarization?
Yes. Yeah. So here's the catch-22, right? We're all sort of at home hiding from something that makes us think about our own mortality, and more than half of American adults don't have wills in place. But in order, under existing law, to get your will finalized, you need to come sit in a lawyer's office with 2 witnesses and a notary public in a little conference room and sign your documents. Just last week, I believe it was Monday, Governor Baker signed this law, which allows attorneys and paralegals supervised by attorneys to conduct basically video notarization sessions.
Just on wills?
Nope, it's anything that you have to notarize. There are some extra hoops you have to jump through. If it's a real estate transaction, you have to have 2 different video conferences. For most things, though, you've just got to, there's a certain script you have to follow. We have to keep a recording of the session for a period of years. And we've just done 2 of them in the last few days, and it's great. You can get it. Takes a little getting used to, but people can essentially get their wills done, written, signed, finalized, and good to go without leaving their home.
Yeah, well, that's convenient.
Yeah.
There are certain things that have to go on regardless.
I'm back.
The truth is, it's funny. You got to be careful not to prey on people's fear. The truth is most people aren't going to die of this disease, but there are real things to consider, like do people have a healthcare proxy or a power of attorney? So if they're hospitalized for a couple of weeks, their life can go on. Parents of young children, do they have something in place? Because unlike other dangers in life, this one likely hits your whole family at once.
Sure. Well, you know what's very interesting, getting to your point about health.
Sorry, I gotta, oops. I keep saying don't call, and they keep calling. What are you gonna do?
For instance, this is a real scare. I just shudder at this. But let's say someone has to be, maybe should be put on a ventilator, and there are huge risks associated with being on a ventilator, other than the fact that you may not survive. But even if you do, there's all kinds of after effects of being on a ventilator. So is it important for someone to not, even if they've never had one of those living wills that says what you do and don't want? Is it really important now, especially, to consider having that?
Sure.
Massachusetts doesn't actually, so a living will is where you sit down and you actually write out, this is what I want and don't want. Massachusetts doesn't technically recognize them.
Mm.
All you do in Massachusetts is you appoint the person. So if I say, I appoint my husband as my healthcare proxy, it's on me to explain to him what I do and don't want.
Mm.
But it's still useful
Why
for
help us? What? Oh, I don't remember.
What about the MOLST form? Can you explain that?
Most form is
What
a
form? I'm missing.
MOLST.
Yeah,
I don't know what the M and the O stand for, but the LST is life-sustaining treatment. It's a form that most facilities will require you to fill out before you, whether it's a nursing home or a hospital, that tells them what you want. If you don't have a healthcare proxy, they can follow that. So if you put in your most, I don't want
Well,
to be.
I've never heard of that one.
They can follow those instructions. A healthcare proxy overrides that document.
Mm-hmm.
A healthcare proxy is a human being that you've delegated the authority to make a real-time decision based on what's going on.
And so does the healthcare proxy need any documentation that validates what the person does or doesn't want if the person can't speak for themselves?
Technically, no. If you have a signed valid healthcare proxy, if I'm holding a healthcare proxy for my mother, for example, and she's unable to make a decision, all that doctors would need from me is the actual healthcare proxy that says I'm the person who gets to make that decision.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
we have like 2
seriously.
minutes left or so.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to say you have to be careful with notarized documents, especially with like real estate, because a lot of people think they take it off a legal Zoom and they'll get somebody to notarize it. And meanwhile, you know that, well, gee, this guy just deeded you the property and you did notarize it, but there's something fishy here because everybody knew he wasn't of sound mind. I saw a real estate deal fall right through because you knew that this deed was not really a proper one, even though it looked it, because it really didn't look it. That's why it's important for people to go to an attorney like Emily, like somebody went to Emily, at least it's an attorney, not something out of a book. Also, those legal Zooms in there, it may not be good for the state that you're in.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
Do we have to wind up soon? Because I'm enjoying this.
We have about a minute left.
She's always a wealth of information, and even though, and a lot of the questions we ask you, we already know the answers. We just want to see if you know them. Sorry for the interruptions. I kept.
Not at all. But you're absolutely right, Roberta. And with wills,
the emergency. What?
With the wills too, not just real estate. This is, I think, one of the reasons it took the legislature a while to pass this bill, is that you need to be sure. We as attorneys need to be sure that if, Roberta, you're signing a will, there's not one of your kids in the corner making faces at you trying to get you to do something that they want to do, right? Mm. So we've got to make sure that the video interviews are thorough and that we know who's in the room and that it's everybody's free act indeed, which is harder to do, candidly, remotely than it is in person.
I think it's time for us. We have to sign off now. It's been 30 minutes.
It's a wrap.
Yeah. Emily, thank you so much.
Yes,
it's really enlightening now, especially to have you on.
Very.
And of course, we'll have you back as things evolve. And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching. This is part of our ongoing series on the impacts of the coronavirus. Today on employment, we've had other topics as well. Please let us know if you have any questions or if you know of another topic related to coronavirus that we haven't yet had. Please let us know, because we want to give you the kind of programming that you want and need. Because remember, this is your show, the law, your money,
and you. They're pointing. Thanks, Emily.